Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Shores, and I have the distinct privilege and honor to serve as the Chief Enrollment Officer and one of the Executive Vice Presidents at the University of the Cumberlands, which is about 15 minutes down 75 here. Excited to talk to you all today about something that is a little bit of a passion project of mine and has been for a number of years, and that's the cost of college and the affordability of college. I don't know if you're like me as a kid who grew up in Southern Appalachia. It was, how am I going to pay for school, right? Mom and Dad certainly were not going to be able to help. Is it I'm going to have to go and find a ton of different scholarships? And, I probably wasn't the brightest student in high school. I didn't maybe take it quite as seriously, but I knew I wanted to go to college, right? So maybe, students are a lot like that in this region, and we certainly know that they are. And the way I ended up paying my way through school was a 20-year military career that helped pay for college, right? But maybe that's not in the cards for everybody. And so what I want to talk to you about today is a pretty data-rich 2 slides, but if you'll bear with me as we kind of walk through this together, I want to walk through why maybe the national rhetoric behind and the conversation behind student loan and student loan debt is partially true, but maybe it's a little bit misleading for a lot of students. So again, the slide behind me shows you a lot of numbers, right? A couple years ago, I put together a list of the top 15 major news sources in America and compiled what is the average debt that they're saying our students are actually graduating with, right? And this is all students. This is public institutions, private institutions, for-profit institutions, everything. But what is the national average for what students are actually graduating with in debt? And that number, the $94,000, is probably something that looks pretty familiar, right? It's part of what we hear in the news media quite consistently, that students are going to graduate with $100,000 in debt. Well, I don't know about you, but if I were a student today, I'd be absolutely terrified at that, right? Terrified to see that number, terrified to how am I going to make my money back on this? But the reality is that the national average is around $34,000 is what a student graduates with undergraduate debt. Now, again, that's nationwide. That's all sources of debt. So where in the world does the media get $94,000 from? Is it a lie? Is it a truth? It's what Jesse Helms, an old politician in North Carolina, used to call a little white lie, right? There's a partial truth to it. And the partial truth is if you take the total number of student loan borrowers and you divide that by the amount of debt that exists for student loans, it actually equals about $94,000. Well, why is that a little bit misleading? Because that includes things like graduate school. It includes things like law school. It includes things like medical school, right, where doctors are graduating with somewhere north of $500,000 in student debt. So it actually skews the number. So when they say the national or the debt that a student will actually have is about $94,000, again, partial truth. But when we're talking about just undergraduate debt, it's really more along the lines of $34,000. The bar chart there actually shows you really at 60,000 and below, which is I want you to focus on the blue chart, if you will, or the blue lines. That actually represents about 65% of all borrowers for undergraduate debt graduate with less than $60,000 in debt. But what the media shows is that the majority of it is in the 90 to 100 plus, right? So skewing that data just a little bit for us there. Does that shock anybody? I'm seeing a couple nodding heads, right? So it's just not the reality for a lot of students. So this next chart is really one of my favorite charts that will walk you through kind of what the average tuition is if we look at just tuition and fees for private colleges in America. Okay, this is private, nonprofit schools in America. I want you guys to focus on that blue graph at the very top. I don't know if this has got a laser pointer on it, but nope. So that blue graph on the very top is what the average cost is. So is the cost of college. Now, we talked about debt a second ago. Let's talk about the cost of college. Is the cost of college out of control? Well, if you go back to the mid-90s and you look at the data that exists, you'll see that the average cost of college was somewhere around $16,000, $17,000 for tuition and fees. Still a fair amount of money back in the mid-90s. Now, if you fast forward to today, to 2020, you look at that number and you'll see that it's more than doubled. So as we hear the cost of college is out of control, if we follow that blue line, that's absolutely true. But let's shift our focus a little bit and talk to what a student actually pays for college. So after things like grants or after things like scholarship that exist, we're not talking student loans, we're just talking about grants, things that they're not gonna have to pay back. So that's when we're gonna look at that yellow line there. And you'll see back in the early 90s, they pay, or mid 90s rather, they paid around $10,000. And then you go up to 2008, 2009, and you'll see that they paid on average about $15,000. Now fast forward to where we're at today, and that number has remained virtually unchanged for students. Virtually unchanged. Now my favorite part of this is let's overlay that with inflation, which is that green line there. And again, this does not include the most recent increase in inflation, which might be clear off the chart here. But you know, you follow that green line and you'll see that the cost of college has actually underpaced the inflation rate. So what does that mean? The actual cost of college to students has remained relatively unchanged for really the last, you know, certainly 10 years, but with inflation, you could make the argument that maybe it's remained unchanged for the last 20 or 30 years. So I'm super excited because I get the opportunity to work at the University of the Cumberlands, and you know, one of the things that we are doing is helping to address this confusion, if you will, about student loan debt, student cost, and all of it that goes along with it. So you saw in the video a few moments ago that we have what we call a one price promise, which is where we're basically telling students that, you know, okay, we recognize what the national average is. We recognize that we know that a college degree is going to pay off for you. There's plenty of research out there that shows that a college graduate makes about $1 million more over their lifetime than their counterparts with just a high school diploma. So we know it's worth the investment. But $9,875 is what our cost is to attend the University of Cumberland's for tuition, fees, books, everything. And you may have seen yesterday, if you've talked to some of my colleagues who are here, we announced our capital campaign yesterday, which we are super excited about. And one of our key focuses on this capital campaign is to reduce this cost for students even further, right? We know that the vast majority, part of our mission at Cumberland's is to really focus on the students of Appalachia. And so we want to do everything that we can to reduce those costs for students. And hopefully within the coming weeks, we'll be able to announce something that's even more exciting. But for now, it's still at $9,875. It is an absolute bargain for students. So I thank you all so much for your time today. And if you have any questions, we'll be hanging out. Glad to answer any. Thank you.